How you doing, Sachi?
I'm here. Like, honestly,
Yeah.
this year is like, if I made it until today, that's an accomplishment.
Talk about this week. So obviously, one of the big pieces of news has been uh, Abe Shinzo stepping down from power and Suga Yoshihide taking power in his place, becoming the new prime minister of Japan. So there's been a lot of like kind of fluff pieces about Suga coming out, I think both in the Japanese and the Western press.
Yes.
And in some ways, he's kind of like an unknown figure. He's been very much not a part of like any of the official factions of the Liberal Democratic Party to which he belongs. And of course, he's mainly been for the past several years. During the past four Abe administrations, acting as the official voice of the Abe administration and reflecting its policies. So I think as part of all this, he's actually coming into office with a really high cabinet approval rating at 74%. From what I read in the Nikkei, that is the third highest starting approval for a cabinet of all time. I think there's probably also a bit of Abe is gone relief built into that number as well. But
Yeah.
it's yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that holds up. But a big question then has become, particularly for more progressive elements in Japan, has been what does Suga's ascent to power mean for, particular for women and minorities? And just a couple of facts to kind of set the tone for the conversation. So Suga has said in the past that he thinks it's necessary to change things in Japanese society that hinder women being a part of society and working in society. However, he's also made kind of ominous gestures on top of that, saying that Japan has to quote unquote protect the family structure at the same time. And then recently, during the run up to him ascending to the prime ministership, he made some positively ambiguous statements about a particular hot button issue, which was separate
Mm.
spousal surnames. So this
Yes.
is currently a fairly hot topic in Japan, and getting hotter is that spouses cannot have separate surnames from one another. It's not legislated, for example, that the wife has to take the husband's surname, but they do have to take the same surname. So
Yes.
as a result, I think mostly women end up taking heterosexual women end up taking the names of like their heterosexual male spouses in those relationships. This is an old law. It's based as a lot of the Meiji and post Meiji laws in Japan were based on European, and specifically this came from a German law. Germany since repealed that law. I think it was like 20 years ago or
Yeah.
something. And most other, I think all other European countries have actually. So this is just kind of like one of those archaic laws, like sodomy laws in the United States, that just tend to stay on the books because no one gets around to changing them.
Mm.
And there's actually a huge wellspring of support for this. There's about 69% of people who were recently polled said that they
Mm.
favor changing this law. Basuga was really cool to the idea, and again made his kind of vague references to not damaging the family structure, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
The only kind of women positive thing I've seen coming out of this administration so far is Mihara Junko, who's now the vice minister for the Ministry of Health, Labor, and Welfare. Kind of otherwise problematic in her own right, and I think we've talked about her before, but she's at least leading the charge to include infertility treatments under national health insurance, which
Hmm.
I did not know was not covered.
No, it's not.
Mm, interesting. So that's somewhat positive, but that's I think the only like kind of
Yeah.
positive initiative I've seen come out of the Suga administration with regards to
Mm.
women's rights so far.
Yep. The only thing, like my big question about this, making like infertility treatments covered by the Social Security, is why? Like, why now?
Mm, right.
And I call me a skeptic, call me a pessimist, call me like an anti Suganomics or whatever you want to call them. I cannot believe they're doing it out of the goodness of their hearts,
Mm-hmm.
rather than just the numbers keep dropping and women are not able to afford the infertility treatments, which can go up to like 1, 2, 3 million yen, and
Wow.
you're not even guaranteed to end up with a baby because
Right.
they fail.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm just very skeptical about this. Also, the fact that something that Suga said was that he wanted to make society a place where women could happily something. I'm paraphrasing, where women could be happy having children and feeling safe and supported by society, which to me reads as I want not just incubators, I want just happy incubators. Which is like, why are we so concerned about that when there's so many things wrong, such as, for example, the cabinet only having 2 women? Like, you want to empower women, but at the same time you want to keep them home and breeding.
Right.
That to me makes no sense.
Yeah, that's actually a fact that I skipped over in my notes here too. It was pointed out by a reporter from BuzzFeed that the current cabinet has the Suga cabinet has 2 women in it. There were 2 women in the cabinet at the start of the Heisei era over 30 years ago. This is a very male-dominated cabinet. I think I translated a tweet from a Japanese user, posted a picture of Suga and 4 other cabinet officials, and the tweet was just from the left. Old man, Oji-san, 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 Oji-san.
Yes, and that,
which is not to be ageist and to say that older people can't serve. I think it's fantastic to see, like, people, anybody in their 60s, 70s, 80s still working and serving in government. That's great. It's the fact that that's the only representation.
Exactly. Like, the average age is 60.
Wow.
The average.
The average.
Yes, and the youngest is Koizumi. I think he's like 50.
Mm-hmm.
He's the youngest.
Yeah.
Like, how do you expect 50, 60, 70-year-old men to know what is going on the streets? And you can say whatever you want about Suga being like the son of farmers and working his way up in a company like a salaryman. That was how long ago? Like, yeah, he's not he wasn't brought up by an elite family. Well, he is pretty much elite now. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, that was literally that would make it like end of show. No, it'd be like the beginning of the Showa period, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Full economic bubble. Like, he's a baby boomer.
Yeah.
Like,
absolutely.
his family will probably, I don't know how they raised him. I have no idea what their situation, how their income was. But you cannot compare the economies of the 60s as now.
Yeah.
And that is something that they try to sell him as the son of farmers, but it's like, he's a prime minister. He is rich. He is filthy rich.
Yeah. I mean, it has been for quite some time.
Yeah, so I don't get it.
Yeah.
I mean, I am very skeptical, and the more I read about him, the less I like him, and I am biased. I just really don't like him.
Well, I think too, the major initiative that we've heard from the cabinet so far, and this is all over news reports right now, is they're going on about cell phones are too expensive. Cell phone bills are too expensive.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, which has been a complaint from a lot of people for a while. But on the other hand, it's like, is that like really the most like pressing issue that Japan faces? It seems that they're pushing that through because it's a really good feel-good populist move. And it's also going to take away from the fact that Suga just said that he thinks the consumption tax, which was just raised, probably is going to be raised again.
Yes.
And taking off the fact that basically large companies and the rich in Japan are pushing more and more of the burden onto the average everyday worker.
Yes, and like, honestly, yes, cell phone companies are ridiculously expensive. I'm not going to deny that. But they are cheap options. Like, those exist as well.
Yeah.
So
yeah, same here.
It's like, sure, but there are other things you should be looking at as well.
It was really interesting to see Miharu Junko tackling the infertility treatments. I think that was a really kind of insightful thing that you said, that is something related to birth and national birth rate, which is something that the LDP has been trying to focus on for a while, but doing it from the standpoint of more women need to pop out babies.
Yes.
And so from that standpoint, this is just kind of the same continuation of that policy, not necessarily anything to empower or elevate anybody.
Exactly.
And I think it's actually very pertinent because one of the major issues in the past couple of years has been coverage of the morning after pill. Yeah, so the morning after, this is, and I'm not aware, like, for example, of a lot of news coverage of, oh, it's really hard to get infertility treatments, but there's been a lot of coverage about the fact that, number one, morning after pill is not covered by insurance. And number two, women in Japan can't even get the morning after pill over the counter. It's one of the few developed countries in which it is not available over the counter. It requires a doctor's prescription.
Yes.
And there are some moves to make that supposedly easier by allowing for a phone or video smartphone consultation for that to happen. But I think you remember we talked about this a couple months ago. It's like the head of the Obgyn Society in Japan basically came out and said women can't be basically said women can't be entrusted with you, right, because they don't have the right sexual education.
Yes.
It's like, whose fault? It's like, whose fault is that? Sorry, YouTube. So be bleep, don't take our money.
It is just like one thing on top of the other, and they just keep like attacking women and putting them in bad positions. It's not only women, like all kinds of minorities, they just keep putting them under tighter constrictions, while at the same time like doing all the propaganda like, oh yes, we are helping women, we want to elevate them to 30% of women in the workforce, which we could not do because I don't know why. Like 30%? You couldn't do 30%?
Yeah, they backed that one was supposed to be done by this year, and they backed off, and they were like, "Yeah, we're gonna whiff that.
We're gonna do 30% in 2030."
Yeah,
it's like, I want to say a swear word, but I will not.
Well, so that's interesting. So the another interesting thing with that is that the Abe for background on this for others, the Abe had a policy of getting 30% of women in leadership, and that's public and private leadership in Japan.
Okay.
Yeah, I from what I've read, I believe it's both, like leadership across the board, not just government. But they're obviously nowhere close to that. They whiffed on that. They pushed that goal off for another. It's like, give us another 10 years. But what's interesting is that if you look at the roster of the last election and look how many women Abe's Liberal Democratic Party fielded for the election, it was 14% of all candidates. So how are you going to say that you're going to meet a goal of 30% when your own party isn't even putting close to 30% of female candidates in the field?
Because they're a bunch of hypocrites.
Right, because they'd never had any intention of actually making that.
Oh, no.